Hi, thanks. So at the City of Seattle, I maintained a Raster roads basemap as one of my main tasks. And then earlier this year, I spent a few months creating a vector tile version. The City of Seattle is an Esri customer, so open source software, things like Mapbox, was not an option. So as soon as Esri released their vector tiles, I jumped on it and began experimenting. So this talk is to pass on what I learned, prevent you from encountering some of the same mistakes and rabbit holes that I did. I packed a lot in. I'm going to try to get through it quickly, and I'm sharing my slides afterwards so you don't have to scribble anything down as I go. This is what I'm going to cover. Quick introduction, probably not necessary here in this crowd, and then key concepts, and then the process that I went through. Vector tiles are here. They're exciting. It feels like the future. I'll speed through this because Hamjul already covered this, but vector tiles cached tile by tile. Each one contains vector data instead of raster data, much smaller to store, much faster to cache. Image is rendered on the client, and the image is a vector image, which leads to better image quality. How much smaller, faster, and better? Well, I had a really good opportunity to compare because we made our own map with our own data. So I already maintained the raster cache version, and then I made a vector tile version using the same data. And the difference is pretty striking. You know, the size of vector tile cache is expressed in megabytes instead of gigabytes. It takes over a week to cache anytime you want to make changes to the raster base map. For the vector one, you can recache in 5.5 minutes. Performance is roughly about the same from some testing I did. And of course, the image quality is better. Let me show you an example. This is using the browser zoom, not the map zoom, but if I zoom in the browser, this really highlights one of the advantages of vector tiles, which is that it gets pixelated if you zoom in on a raster tile. The vector tile is still smooth. This is a nice feature for someone who has trouble reading small text, a good accessibility feature. And my favorite feature is that you can change the style without recaching the data. You don't even have to own the data. You can style someone else's tiles. It's kind of like a layer file in ArcMap. It contains just the symbolization and no data, the style sheet. All right, first some key concepts. Overall, vector tiles are exciting. I'm excited about working with them. And you might think it's going to be like this, but actually my experience was a little more like that. It can be frustrating, time-consuming, and tedious at times. Documentation was sparse, and out-of-the-box result takes a little more work to make nice. So I'm going to show you the way through. Here is another key concept, scale-based sizing. In ArcMap, this is how we would set up our MXD for our base map with a group for each scale level, and then the layers repeated in each one symbolized how they should look at each scale level. In ArcGIS Pro, usually you only need to have your layers appear once because of scale-based sizing. You can set visibility, you can set for each scale the size you want, and it will smoothly interpolate between anything you set. This makes maintenance a lot simpler. Another key concept as you're making this transition, that zoom level and scale level may be backwards to how you're used to thinking about it. So at the City of Seattle, these are the scale levels that we used, and we're used to thinking about them sort of from top to bottom on this list. In the vector tile world, they use zoom levels, and they think about it sort of bottom to top in this list, from lower numbers to higher numbers. This seems pretty straightforward, but it can really trip you up, because suppose you want to set something that would be in your map at 1 to 300, between 1 to 300 and 1 to 600. You'd set that in your group called 1 to 300, but if you're doing it on the vector tile side, you'd be setting it at zoom level 20, and you can see those don't line up. So as you're transferring settings back and forth, you can get them in the wrong place. I recommend making yourself a little table like that and printing it to refer to, because that's what I did. And another tip along those lines, start associating that right away. So I put a little thing in my ArcMap MXD saying which zoom level everything was, and I made an alias in ArcGIS Pro so I could associate those in my mind. And since vector tiles display at all scales, not just the set ones, you can't use these sort of intermediate round numbers for scale visibility anymore, which we were doing. Here's an overview of the process. I'm going to walk you through each one of these, but I want to start with an important thing, which is that I don't recommend simply importing your basemap MXD into ArcGIS Pro. That's what I did, and it ended up costing me a lot more time in the end. Instead, spend some extra time in ArcMap, noting your settings, and build it from scratch in ArcGIS Pro. It'll be faster that way. Okay, so this is the first, we're going to talk about what's going to happen in ArcMap here real quick as you're recording your styles and your settings. Anything you've set up, custom colors, badges, line styles, symbols, save those into your style manager because that can all be imported into Pro. This might sound kind of strange, but trust me, I recommend recording your symbology and label settings in a spreadsheet. I know it sounds like overkill, but if you think about switching back and forth between ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro, trying to transfer settings, and how in ArcMap settings can be maybe 8 windows deep, clicking in and out of that is also very time-consuming. So in my case, I made some quick notes in Excel, kind of rough, just the relevant non-default settings, and that made it faster. It was also a good chance to reevaluate and simplify my class breaks. And then you move on to Pro, start a new project, and import the things that you saved. At this point, you might want to consider making 2 maps instead of just one that has features and one for labels. That allows you to sandwich data in between the 2 of them. All right, let's talk about authoring the map. But wait, before you make your map in Pro perfect, end-to-end, the whole map like I did, it's better to make a small prototype map with a few layers, take it through this whole process, learn from that, and then set up your map in Pro. I wasted a lot of time because I didn't really understand how it all worked until I went through the publishing process. Now we can talk about authoring the map. So here we are on the process. And now it's time to do some cartography. This should be your wheelhouse. You may, if you're new to ArcGIS Pro, you may need to use Google to find out what things are called or where those features are, because they're kind of things have been moved around and renamed. And there are some quirks. Scale-based sizing is wonderful. Usually you just need one layer for your features and no classes a lot of the times. However, this feature doesn't exist for labels right now. So you need a lot of label classes. This is just an example of one of my layers with a lot of label classes for different sizes of cities at different zoom levels. On top of that, you can't copy the parameters from one label class to another as you can in ArcMap. And you can't reorder this list. So setting up labels can be a little tedious. This is a big reason why you should lean on using imported styles, because that speeds things up. Remember I said it was easy to change sizes of things by scale. You can also do things like change color by scale. It's a little buried. The feature is called alternate symbols. And this is sort of how you get to it. You have to use unique values symbology. And then you can find the alternate symbol option. Another quirk is that in ArcMap, generally if you have roads, a cased road, you would just make a single symbol with 2 layers in it. I couldn't get that to display very well in ArcGIS Pro into the vector tiles. That example there on the right side, or that side, is the best I could do with the various combinations of cap and join settings. So in vector tile land, it's better to have your fill and your casing or your shadow in completely separate layers. And you can see they join up nicely. Badges. Previously in ArcMap, they were buried under something called text background. In ArcGIS Pro, they're buried under callout. Took me a while to find that. Okay, let's talk about the publishing process. Here we are. One quick note is that all the wonderful Mapbox label logic is included when making the vector tiles. It creates where the labels will be, and it uses those settings. So go ahead and use those. There are a few that don't work. I'll cover that later. The quickest way to publish is to use the Share as Web Layer tool. If you use the default tiling scheme, that will be a quick and easy path to publishing. This tool creates vector tiles, packages them up with other ingredients like fonts and icons, and publishes it to ArcGIS Online, which I used, or Portal. However, we needed to use a custom tiling scheme at the City of Seattle because we wanted to use a different coordinate system. There's a tool called Generate Tile Cache Tiling Scheme, but what it generated didn't work for me. I think because it was designed for raster tiles. I had to call Esri support to get a working tiling scheme. A few requirements if you're doing this: tile size must be 512 by 512. Scale levels must double each level, and the scale level 0 must contain your data's entire extent. There was a bug, however. I had to set my scale level 0 to 1 to 629 million, which is a lot. It's a lot smaller of scale than I would need to contain my data. But once I set it to that, then it finally started to work. I've thrown the text in here for future reference in case that helps anybody. Okay, what's in a vector tile package? Someone at Esri tipped me off to the fact that the package, the VTPK, is just a renamed zip file. So you can rename it back to zip and unzip it and take a look inside. Here's what's inside there. You can see the fonts, the styles, and the sprites are all packaged up in there. And sometimes it crashes. I was just about done. I had my map mostly all ready, and then I started getting these errors. I called Esri support again. In this case, they weren't that much help. It really was a matter of trial and error, trying to figure out which layer was affecting it. So try looking at the things you edited last and kind of trial and error that if you get some crashes. And then you're done, and you have published a map. But you're not done, because the out-of-the-box result, for me at least, wasn't that good. The text was 1/3 larger than it should be, and the line wrapping setting wasn't working. So lines weren't wrapped very much. So there was a lot of text collisions and labels. There weren't very many labels. As you can see, the fixed by hand version is how, I'll show you in the next part here how to get to that. I forged ahead. This can take time. This might be the time where you feel like giving up and using someone else's map where they've already fixed these problems. Okay, vector tile styling. This is the part that I'm going to be talking about now, and we're going to zoom in a little bit on that process. There's 2 ways to style. It starts and ends in ArcGIS Online, or portal. From there, you can use the Esri Style Editor, which is a web-based kind of lightweight editor, or you can edit the JSON style directly in a text editor. Here's a quick look at the Esri Style Editor. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's good for quickly changing colors or toggling visibility. Your end users might be interested in it. But I'm going to talk about styling by editing the JSON directly. In order to style, you need to make yourself a copy of the layer you've already published. If you find you can't copy it, there's no copy option in there. That's because it's been put in the basemap part of your map on ArcGIS Online. If you remove it from the basemap, then you can make a copy and save it. Now you have some new buttons on the detail page. That's where you get the style, and then you update it after you're done. The Esri Vector Tiles uses the Mapbox tile style specification. I recommend printing that and keeping it on your desk. I do that, and I refer to it still pretty much every day. Here's a quick look at what the JSON might look like for a single feature and its label. You can see kind of the standard settings there, font. What I want to highlight here are the stops. That's the scale-based sizing. So under the label there where it says stops, that means that at zoom level 16, the font should be 15, and at zoom level 17, the font should be 18. The nice thing about scale-based sizing is that you can do that with any numeric value, not just sizes. So over there in the feature, I'm doing that with colors, because those are hex numbers. You can also do it with things like transparency, spacing, rotation, offset, anything like that. There are some issues you'll encounter. When it first comes out, it looks like this. Luckily, most code editors have sort of a hotkey that will format it properly. Also, coming out of ArcGIS Pro, it doesn't come out entirely elegantly. It does the scale-based sizing nicely for size, but it doesn't if you want to do it for, say, color. So here, I changed the color at different scales, and it created 3 copies of that in my JSON. So I had to manually go in and kind of consolidate that. This is one of the other time-consuming parts, especially for a map with a lot of layers. But if you take the effort, you will have an elegant and readable style that is easy to maintain. One other thing to keep in mind, check the layer order. When it publishes from ArcGIS Pro, I found it could sometimes get reordered in sort of a random order. So make sure your layers are ordered the way you want. And speaking of that, the layers may be reversed order from what you're used to. So in ArcGIS Pro, you have that stacking layer, and then the map stacks kind of parallel to that, the way you're used to working. The JSON, however, it reads from top to bottom. It reads the first one, puts it at the bottom of the map, and then stacks it up from there. So your top layer will be at the bottom of the style sheet. And I recommend uploading your style changes frequently, because if you upload a malformed JSON style file, ArcGIS Online silently ignores it and doesn't give you an error or tell you what went wrong. It just uses the last known good version. So upload frequently so if something breaks, you know what it was. There are a few buggy things that I'm just going to cover here quickly. These three are the key. I've noticed that they don't come across from how you set them in ArcGIS Pro. The line wrap length, the leading, and text size. For me, all the sizes came out 1/3 larger than I set them in Pro. So that was a neat kind of a search and replace in the JSON. So these are the things that make a key difference between the out-of-the-box version and the manually fixed version. There are a lot of other little quirks, which I'm just going to quickly gloss over. The first two are sort of Mapbox style specification quirks, and then the other two are bugs that I found. You can't use rivers placement, label placement for polygon layers, and I could not get lines to offset no matter what settings I used. Okay, you're done. Now you can share your web map. One thing to note is that as well as sharing your fancy new one that you've styled, you also have to share your originally published ones, the ones that say hosted next to them. If you don't share those, then nobody can view your data. And one tip is if you do the map sandwich idea with your features and labels in two separate maps, you need to set the label one as a reference layer in the base map. Once you do that, anything set as a reference layer is rendered on top of the thematic data in the map in ArcGIS Online. Here's one last look at the publishing process. And that's it. That's where you get my slides, and you have a few looks at different zoom levels of the vector map that I created for the city.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Perfect timing. We have time for 2 or 3 questions. Does anyone want to ask Kate anything? Did she cover everything as well? All right, Kate, thanks so much. Oh, we have a question in the back.
Yes. So when you published your custom vector basemap for the city, what extent did it cover? Was it just stuff within Seattle, or did you go out to
Okay. So.
And how did you integrate it so that when people zoom out, it's white all around?
Right. That's a good question. So he asked what extent my map covered and what did we do about zooming far enough away that we were outside of the city. We had some state data, but really, because we're a city, our use cases are focused in the city. So the real detailed data was only in the city limits and some of our utility transmission line areas. And so when you zoom out, you do get kind of Washington State and some highways and things like that, and water bodies, but really outside of Washington State it was white. But we just didn't have use cases for anything further. It was really just city focused.
All right, Kate, thanks so much.